Here I have a 2017 Audi A7 supercharged. We're getting ready to do the front and rear brakes. First off, you want to make sure that you get underneath the jack pad. This one doesn't have a typical frame rail deal. It's got a pad right here. You don't want to put it back further on the pinch weld. You want to put it directly on that pad. And preferably, if you had something like a hockey puck, that would be even better. But I'm going to make sure that it's perfectly centered. So I'm going to go up a little bit more. Right there's perfect. Now before I go ahead and lift it all the way up, I like to get in the practice of breaking these wheel bolts off with a breaker bar, because sometimes the impact doesn't get it, even the most powerful impacts, and it saves the impact anyway. So these caps first have to come off with a cap puller. If you put your needle nose pliers in there like a lot of tire shops do, you'll end up scratching up these wheels. My buddy's got a little squirrel feeder up here on his front porch. So these little guys are pretty friendly to him. Let's see how close I can get as a stranger. Hey buddy, what's happening? Is that some good cereal? Don't mind me. What? I ain't doing nothing. Go back to eating. Oh, come on. You know you want some more food. Anyway, back to work. We've got the special tool in here. The plastic cap puller. Wheel bolt cover puller. Special Audi tool. Look at that. These things are stuck in there pretty good. I gotta really pull on them. That one's... There we go. Yeah, those were all stuck good. Those would not have come off easily with some needle nose pliers. These aren't going to scratch anything up. Now let's break those wheel bolts loose. Weren't even on there very tight, but sometimes they are. Only about a quarter turn will do the trick, just as long as they loosen themselves up. Alright, now I can jack the whole wheel up and zip it off with the impact. Now that all these bolts are out, it can still be kind of difficult to get the wheel off, so I usually just palm it at the top, but I try to keep my knee here in case it falls back on me. So there we go. Then we got two different torques right here. We got one T30 that's holding this rotor on, and I believe this is a T45 that's holding this anti-rattle clip on. So let's get those off. Sometimes these are in there really tight, and if you don't get it out with an impact driver, you can strip it out. And in this case, it's not even really fitting all that well. But I'm probably going to have to get this out with two hands, unfortunately. I don't know if I can prop open the... Oh, there we go. It came out easy. Doesn't always do that. So you have to be really careful with this. When in doubt, do not strip it out, because then you're going to have to drill it out. And then you won't have one to put back in, most likely. Alright, now we got to go with a T45, and this one should come out no problem. That's a 40, and that's the 45. And this is a cheap Harbor Freight ratchet, but actually I'm kind of fond of it. It's handy. There we go. And once you get this bolt out, this all should come off fairly easily. Gonna carefully set this to the side, and then we'll have to get, oh no, fingers got it. I'll have to admit, in the past I've been kind of lazy. I didn't typically break this bleeder screw loose right here and evacuate the fluid from the caliper before pushing the pistons in, but I'm going to start getting into the habit of hooking up my bottle and getting this fluid out of the caliper as I press this piston in, or these pistons, depending on your caliper. This one's a dual piston from the back, I believe. Yep. That's just a good practice to get into, so you can make sure you evacuate this, and then you can further bleed it a lot faster. And technically the service interval is every 2 years for brake fluid, but almost everybody ignores brake fluid after warranty period. So the other thing is, the reason why I've neglected doing that is because sometimes this bleeder screw doesn't go all the way in fully, or maybe you'll strip it out when you try to get it out. Sometimes these things are really bad rusted, but on the other hand, if you don't ever take them loose, then they will for sure get rusted in there and get damaged. Typically these are 11 on Audis. I don't know if VWs are the same, but I usually just smack it with my palm. I use my palm hammer a lot. There we go, and then go back and forth with it to break it free. And then by the time it's broken free, you can just hold it right there and then put your hose on it. In this case, I'm going to use my evacuator pump. So in this case, I don't even have the bleeder cap on. I just put a small piece of hose right here, and that's going to work just fine. It fits over the nipple perfectly, and I got it hooked up to my evacuator pump. So I don't even think that I need to put pressure on it, vacuum pressure on it, but I'm just going to break it loose, and then it should push all this fluid out whenever I compress this with a pry bar. But first I'm going to get in there, turn the ignition key on, and give myself a little bit better room. If you'll notice, this rotor has some grooves in it. They're not horrible, but there are grooves in here. And there's some rust buildup. Not horrible, but there is some rust. It would have been perfectly fine to put new pads on these old rotors, but there is an increased chance for brake noise with these grooves. The grooves are only going to get worse. They're not going to get better with new pads. And the rust is only going to get worse. It's not going to get better. And there's a certain amount of heat cycles that this thing can take until the rotors physically warp, and then you'll feel it. When you have warped rotors, it's from heating up and cooling down, heating up and cooling down. It's the heat cycles, and it depends on how hard someone's braking. Even if it's not presenting itself right now, even if the rotors aren't warped right now, there's a chance, a very high likelihood, that you'll experience the warpage with the pad slap. So for the best customer satisfaction, it is always good to replace the pads and the rotors, especially in the front. You can get away with putting just the pads on the rear a lot more than just the front, because you're typically going to feel the warpage in the front. Now here we have the brake pad wear sensor, and I should be able to pull this just straight out. There's a little plastic clip right here, so you want to be mindful of that to not break that. So I'm going to pull a little bit of that slack loose, and this is going to be replaced anyway, because as you'll find, this will be cut. So I'm just going to wiggle this out, and it's in there pretty good. I'm actually just going to go ahead and collapse this caliper first. So open that brake bleeder, and then I'm going to take my pry bar in here. Everything's getting replaced in here, so I'm just going to see if it fits, which it barely does in this case. And then you see that fluid pushing through there. Flip this thing around now to get a better angle on it. So all that fluid has come out of there. Now, see if this, came out a lot easier. And what you'll find is it cut that wire. It's just a wear sensor wire. If you don't have a new wear sensor, then someone probably stole it out of your box of pads, because the pads that I purchased initially did not have them in there. I had to look in the... Actually, it was a little bit of a fiasco with the pads. I was told that they were ceramic, but I went to the store and found out they were semi-metallic, and I wanted ceramic for this setup, so we'll talk about that whenever I pull the boxes out. Anyway, this wear sensor, you're going to follow it back here, right here, and we don't care about this old one because we got a new one, but let's say you're trying to save it. You want to take this is the wrong tool, but you want to take a pick back there and lift up this ear and move it back. But if you don't care about it, you can just hold it right there. See if I can get a good view for you. You can just hold it right there and then twist it over. But if you do that, if you don't pick up this ear and move it, then it'll never fit in again, because there's a little tiny ball right here. Actually, this one didn't break, but this ear will often break off, and then it'll never clip into place. You'll have to zip tie it into place. And then you just simply unplug this, and then that's all there is to it. So we'll get that with both hands here in a second. Alright, make sure that these pistons are fully collapsed. I'm going to go ahead and push this back in a little bit, and then I'm going to get between here. If you're not replacing the rotors, then you don't really want to be prying against the rotors. But I am replacing everything. So the pistons are all the way pushed back in, and now I can get these caliper bridge bolts out. Now you don't have a great deal of room here. You want to be mindful of the body. I've got a long breaker bar. You could put an impact back here as well. I actually didn't bring it with me. I thought I did, but I didn't. So I'm going to have to use the old breaker bar for these caliper mounting bolts. I got my arm right here, making sure it's not going to hit anything. That was against the jack. Just make sure it's mounted, and then it's not the perfect angle, so you got to be careful here. You just give it a nice little steady push. Alright, do the same thing with the top. With a long breaker bar, you're going to be in good shape. Sit it on the top here, just feel around for it. Where is it? Right there it is. Alright. And there we are. Most of the time you can take the socket off and just spin it out by hand after that. Now if you push the piston back, you shouldn't have any trouble getting it over a lip. There is a definite lip on here. You should pull straight off, and as I've said before in a few of my other videos, I don't feel guilty about letting it sit on the weight of the brake hose. It really depends on how heavy the caliper is. This one's a little bit on the heavier side, but I still think that in my past experience and working with other older mechanics, a lot more experienced than me, they've had no problem with this. And in the future, I'll do a stress test on this brake hose and see how much it can actually hold before it causes a problem, and we'll find out. We'll do a test on that. If you want that video, tell me in the comments, because that's just an idea I just came up with. And now we got to pop this rotor off, and I feel a bigger lip on the backside of it. The backside feels a whole lot worse than the front side. We'll take a better look at it as soon as I pop this off. We're going to see if we can't get this off without a hammer. Most people take a hammer and they just bang on this, but theoretically that could put a little bit extra wear on the wheel bearing. So this might or might not be a good idea. I just now came up with this. You can tell me in the comments, but I have limited tools here on this mobile repair. My car's back there, and I'm just going to take the back side of my breaker bar and put it in this ear hole of the caliper bridge, and I'm just going to give it some nice little pulls, and it's stuck on there pretty good, but I still popped it loose like that. So I severely doubt that you're going to do any kind of damage right here, and you could also make the case that even if you're prying against it, that it will do same or similar damage to hammering on the side of this. But the best way to possibly get this rotor off is some manufacturers have threaded holes in this rotor itself, and maybe it's one side or maybe it's both sides, and you can screw a bolt into this and it presses against this backing plate and it will slowly push the rotor off. That's the absolute best case scenario, but Audi does not have that. Now with this caliper up here and this backing plate going all the way around here, you're not really going to be able to see the back of the rotor, but now you can see that the back of the rotor was in a lot worse shape than the front of the rotor. A lot more grooves, a lot more rust. So I always suggest replacing the front pads and rotors every time you do front brakes. I suggest replacing new parts on absolutely everything, but it all depends on people's budget. Right. These are the rotors I ended up getting from, not from Carquest, but from Advance Auto. And let's take a look. Some of these have oil all over them, and you have to wipe that oil off. The good thing about these are they're painted. They're painted on the hub surface, and the inside of the vents are also painted. This one in fact does have oil all the way on the inside of this. You see the oil residue? So we're going to have to get that off of there before we install those, because that can mess up the pads. That can also make the, well, it will in fact, look at all this oil, it will in fact make the brakes smoke really bad, but the oil will get on the pad surface and contaminate it. So what I've got for that is like mechanic hand wipes, mechanic wet wipes, and we're just gonna clean these up. I'll show you how I do that in the field. I want you to see how even the inside is painted. So that's very nice. That will hold off the rust a lot better. But look at all this oil. What I got for that are these Gojo scrubbing towels. Of course, you could spray it with brake cleaner, and most people are probably going to tell me that in the comments, like I don't know. But these are really nice for your hands and for removing oil. So you'll see how well they work. All I have to do is rub them around, get the front and back, and we're good to go. They work extremely well, in my opinion. Look at this. Carquest had a little bit of paint on the surface here. I'm going to get a razor blade and scrape it off. But we're just going to get these towels, clean off all this oil. Before I put this rotor on, we're going to be very careful with this backing plate to not bend it, but I'm going to move these over here. I'm going to make sure that there's grease on these slide pins, and I'm going to pop these pads out like such. And this inside pad. In this case, I was able to just take this whole assembly right here and slide it forward on these pins. I can inspect these pins, and also it popped this pad out. So if you wanted to take them all the way out, there's these little plastic covers, and then you can actually unscrew these pins from this assembly just by popping these covers off. I think it might be a 7mm hex. I can't remember the exact size. Maybe it's 6, but now you can see these pads. They're not worn all the way down, but they're severely cracked. And what can happen is the pad material itself can come clean off the backing plate because it's just glued on this metal backing plate. So you can't always go by the thickness of the pad. You have to oftentimes look at it, and if you look really close, you can see those cracks go all the way to the back of the backing plate. Especially on the rear pads, I've seen this material slide all the way off, and then the piston actually hits the rotor itself. So keep that in mind. Now this is the other pad, and it's got the same amount of cracks. See the thickness, but you can't go all the way down to the very edge, because with the amount of cracks we got here, the glue could separate, the pad material could come clean off the backing plate. So those pads are junk, definitely ready to be replaced when the wear sensor cuts it. Try to see if we can get some grease on these pins, because we got them practically all the way out. So I'm just going to smear some grease on these pins, and for that I've got some Sil Glide. We're going to put that on these pins, and then I'm going to slide this back into place and then load the pads up just like so. So I got the little dab of grease on there. You don't want to have too much on there. I'm just going to get it all the way around. And then I'm going to slide this assembly back and forth a little bit. And whatever excess is on there, I'm going to wipe it off, because I don't want anything to contaminate the brake pads. But there's a highly unlikelihood of it coming off of these pins. Just going to make sure it's all the way around all the sides. Wipe off the excess with my mechanic wet wipes. I take my screwdriver and pull that little excess out of the sides, and we'll be ready to load our pads up. Here's what I ended up getting: some Akebono ceramic ultra premium. Supposed to come with the wear sensors, and it did. I had to special order these from my local Advanced Auto Parts. I was actually given a little bit of a discount, maybe even about a couple $100 off, just because of the way I talked to the guy. Kind of showed him what the price was online. Kind of told him that I prefer to support the brick and mortar businesses, but if I have to special order them, I might as well get them online for a little bit cheaper. And guess what? He ended up price matching, and I was able to get these even faster than online anyway. So sometimes it helps to ask, or to kind of schmooze the people. Act like you're not really all that interested in how expensive the stuff is. It really depends on how you explain it and how you present yourself. But I was able to get myself the discount. Now let's pop these things in. I don't typically put grease on the side of this, but sometimes this paint, see, look at that. There's rust on there and the paint isn't right. So it's a little bit rough. That's why I typically carry a file, and sometimes I have to file this paint off, because if it sticks inside here and it doesn't want to move in this caliper bridge here, then it can cause some binding. So you always want to inspect the ears. Like, that side's okay, but this side might cause problems. See that rust? That's unacceptable, Akebono. Send me a refund. Let's check out a couple of these others. That one's alright. That one's a little bit boogered. You gotta feel it. It's not so smooth. I'm gonna run my file over all of these. Of course, you don't want to take material off, you just want to take the rust or paint off. If you looked at the OEM pads, which these might not be OEM either, actually they are, those are Audi pads, then these are nice and smooth. You're always going to get the best parts from OEM, original equipment manufactured. So I wasn't able to show you this. I had to pop this thing in with both hands. It's spring loaded, so you just kind of have to guide it in there, push it in there, make sure that your ears are underneath here, and then the springs pop into those pistons. And then this one on the outside, you need to make sure that you get the right ones in the right place. On the inside in the actual pistons, and these go on the outside, this part right here. So let's slide this outer pad in, and it should go the same way. You should be able to just kind of push it in there, and then there we go. But now this pad wanted to pop back out. So you see I got these pads inserted, and now I'm just going to toss this rotor. It's always a good idea to inspect your face of your bearing hub, and sometimes there can be excessive rust buildup in between where the wheel fits. because it doesn't never really fit perfectly flush, and even if it does, some water can get in here and rust and create high and low spots. So I usually like to take my file and just run it across this face and knock off all the rust spots. Of course, with two hands it's a lot easier. That's one reason why I really like these German hubs with the wheel bolts rather than the studs that stick out. It's really easy to clean. Make sure to get that bolt in there after they're perfectly clean. We're just gonna toss it up here. Spin it around until it's perfectly located and bolt it up with my little screw. That is just a small screw. You don't want to impact it in there to strip it out or put too much torque on it to where it busts the head clean off. So you might want to get out your quarter drive torque wrench for that if you're not confident enough. Alright, that looks like a slight imperfection in the rotor. I can feel little divots there, so I don't really like that either. So maybe don't buy the Carquest rotors. 2-year warranty though, so if something goes on with them, I'll just change them. So we're just gonna slide this whole deal on very carefully. Somewhat of a tight fit. We're also gonna have to put this wear pad sensor in, but we can do that after the fact. We can just slide that right in. It's gonna... There we go. See that? Now we bolt it in. And to bolt it in, it's going to be a little bit difficult to line up. You just kind of have to move it around side to side while you have the bolt, and you're just going to try to fit the bolt in the back. So I can't really show you that with one hand. But I got the bottom bolt in, and now we're going to go for the top bolt. So I'm just going to feel where it is here. Right there. Felt the hole with my finger. Slide the bolt in. Of course, you could stick your head back there if you really wanted to. And now move it side to side. I felt it engage. Screw it in a little bit. And now you're just going to bolt it in with your actual ratchet. If you didn't know, these back caliper bolts, they get really tight. You have to really torque them good. And you got to be careful with your breaker bar here because you get a fender and such. You don't want this to slip off, but it might be difficult to get the correct angle for an actual torque wrench. You just really have to make sure it's right, all the way tight. Kind of give it some umphs. You want to make sure your spring clip is in here, and then just push this into place. And then you want to make sure that this one's pushed in. We're going to wrap this around the back side and then slide this slot in. You see there's a slot. Put it in sideways and then rotate it into place. You'll hear it click right there. And now we plug it in right here. And it's being a little bit stubborn. You gotta make sure that the clip is on the right side. The trigger clip is on the bottom, so then on the connector the trigger clip is on the bottom. There's also a flat side and a round side. You could go by that as well. But just gotta, there we go. And then that one gets clipped in as well. This backing plate goes on second. You can see the witness marks for it. This spring clip goes in first. You got to make sure that it goes in right. You push it back here, and then you're going to have to spring load it and get it clipped in. And still it's not perfect, but you're going to have to get it perfect with the bolt. So then we set this into place, and now we're going to screw it in. Be careful not to cross thread it because it's under tension. See how it's not perfectly lined up? A little bit too much on the bottom than the top. I'm going to unscrew it a little bit and center it up. There we go. See that? Now it's perfectly centered. Now I'm going to go back in with it. Get it nice and tight, but not too tight. And we're ready to bolt the wheel back up after we finish bleeding and put the cap back on. Go ahead and get these wheel bolts tight, or at least snug, before you drop the vehicle down. You could zip them in with an impact right now, but I'm going to get them snug first with this bar, and then I'm going to get them tight with this bar once I drop this jack down. Don't forget to pop your wheel caps back in when you're done. Do the same thing on the other side. I've got a video for the rear brakes on this same exact car. I'll pin it in the comments. Naptown tuner. Well, this wheel on the passenger side did not want to come off. So the proper tool is a big, heavy, maybe like even 10-pound plastic mallet. That way, if you hit the rim, it doesn't damage it. But all I had was this 4-pound sledge, and what I did was I jacked it up to where I knew that all I was going to get was this tire, so just barely off the ground. And then I got back here and just hovered on the ground like this and just hit the tire. And after a few hits, it came loose, but I had my leg right here to make sure that the wheel didn't fall flat over on its face. And it worked. So